What do you think the most important art fundamental is? Form? Perspective? Some of you might even be thinking composition. And while those are all good guesses, I would say all of those are wrong. And not because of the title. I don't think light is the most important fundamental either. I think every fundamental is just as important as one another, and missing only one will throw the rest into chaos. But if you were to ask me what my favorite fundamental is, now that would be light. Light is, in my opinion, the most interesting aspect of art. It's how we're able to see everything in the first place. It's how we see texture. It's how we turn boring compositions into interesting ones. It's how we draw the viewer's attention to the things we want them to see and mask out the things that we don't. So in this video, I'll be going over everything you need to know about lighting your artworks. This will cover all the aspects on how you can get from a few basic colors to a fully lit piece. And after covering everything about light, I want to go over how I applied these things in my newest piece. Now, as a bit of a guideline on how this video should work, the aspects of light can be broken down into very simple questions. Questions that I want to give you the mental tools on how to answer, but questions that you must ask yourself and apply these tools to on your own time if you want to get any meaningful results. So let's get started. Source light. The first and easiest to grasp yet hardest to master aspect of lighting would be source light. Source light is exactly what it's called, the main source of lighting on your subject. There's no real limit on how many of them you can have in your drawings. You could have only one, or you can have even 5 if you're crazy enough to try that. So the first 2 questions I want you to ask yourself when lighting anything is where is your source light and how many of them are there? These are 2 very simple questions that pretty much anyone could answer even without drawing a single thing in their life. Just simply think, where's the light coming from? The sun? A lamp? A flashlight? Anything. But where things start to get complicated are in the next few questions. Firstly being, how strong is this light? If you have multiple light sources in a scene, for example, the one that highlights the focal point, like the face, you usually want to be the strongest. Or maybe you want all the lights to have an equally weak strength to let the ambient light do the heavy lifting, which we'll get into later. There are multiple ways to approach this, but one thing to keep in mind and will help guide you through these questions is thinking about what mood you want to convey and where you want the viewer to look. Because a good, well thought out light source is pretty much just a spotlight for what you want to stand out the most. The next question is, what color are these lights? Is it warm, cool? How will that affect the shadows in your drawing, as you want your shadows to complement your lights? For example, one of the most common lighting scenarios is when a character is outdoors, the sun is shining down on them, and due to this warm light of the sun and the ambient blue light of the sky, artists typically use blue shades for the shadows. So what do you do if your light source is green or purple? What colors can you mix with these to make the illustration as a whole look pleasing to the eye? And with that, we're left with the final and by far the most complicated and expansive question of source lighting. Where will the light be hitting? This question might sound extremely simple at first, but here's an example at how complicated these things can get. Here's a drawing I made back in June that I felt extremely proud in. I felt like the light was executed very well and it had a dramatic, cool feel to it. And so, wanting to get some critique on it, I brought it to Pluvium Grandis as he was giving feedback at the time, which he is not now, so please don't bother him. And one of the biggest critiques he immediately gave me was on my source light and where it was hitting. And this was one of the pieces that I was the most confident in my lighting in. So again, the question of where the source light is hitting is a very hard and very important one. But a simple tool that I like to use is to imagine that you are where the source light is, and your imaginary self is looking down at your drawing. What can you see from this angle? Whatever you do see is what you should cover in that light. Phew, man, that was a lot. You still with me? Good, because next up is ambient light. Ambient light is the background or environment light. The light emitted by things that aren't from the source light. Basically, it's the question, what light is emitted by the things around your subject? A simple example of this would be, like I said before, where you're in an outdoor environment and your source light is the sun. The ambient light would be coming from the big, giant blue sky above our heads, which is why nearly every bright outdoor piece has blue shades or tints in them. The main thing to think about is how to make everything harmonize with each other, with the ambient light being kind of like the glue that connects all the pieces of your drawings together. For example, if I were to take a drawing like this and then change the ambient light of the character, they would look very out of place compared to the rest of the drawing. Even though if I were to go black and white, the values would actually be fine. Not the most complicated thing compared to source light, but again, think of it like the thing that grounds everything into the same place. Bounce light. Bounce light is usually the part where most people struggle to get down. But stick with me here because I guarantee this will elevate your drawings once you figure this stuff out. Okay, so we understand what source light is, and we understand that objects give off their own light in the form of ambient light. Bounce light is essentially the combination of both of these concepts. Bounce light is the reflection of the source light off objects onto your other objects or subjects. This gives them that last step into realism. It's basically kind of like enabling ray tracing in your drawings. It's a bit hard to explain exactly in words beyond what I already said, and there's so many different scenarios to apply this to, so I'll just go over a few examples. Here in this piece from an artist called Echogate, you can see these yellow tones on the fingers, and that would be the bounce light from the yellow thorns reflected onto those fingers, which in turn contrasts extremely well with the dark cyan shades of the drawing. And in this piece from Kan Liu, the goat, the main light source is the sun, and it's pretty desaturated. Maybe even on the side of cool, but that leaves room for vibrance not to come from the desaturated source light, but from the orange tint from the bounce light reflecting off the ground below. So playing around with this concept and asking yourself the question, this is a bit of a long one, how does the source light affect the objects in your drawing, and how can that interaction be shown to the viewer, is one of the main things that you want to do with bounce light, and if done correctly, it could completely shift the tone of your drawings. Rim light. Rim light is basically just source light with a bit of a twist. The light is behind the character, so you can't apply lighting directly onto them as you could with the most other scenarios. In this case, you simply outline parts of your subject in that light. This brings me back to the tool of putting yourself in the shoes of that light source. If you were there, right in that environment, what parts of the character could you see from the back and the front of them? So in that sense, rim lights are usually applied on the rounder edges of characters, especially when they're caving into each other. So at this point, we've gone over the four main aspects of light: the source, ambient, bounce, and rim lights. There are a lot more aspects of light that I could go over, such as how they affect materials, reflections, transitions between light and shadow, but those are all subjects that I believe deserve their own videos. And I would like to enjoy my Christmas not editing this one. So with these four concepts in mind, let's see how I apply them in my newest artwork of Hoshimi Miyabi. So to keep things simple, I'll only be going over the lighting aspect of this piece, how I got from these base colors to a lit scenario, and some of my thought process and choices here. So starting at the base colors, one thing you need to make sure is that the inherent values of your drawing look good together, even without a lighting scheme, because as I said before, every fundamental is just as important. So the worse you are at this point, no matter how good your lighting masks it, there's still going to be problems in the final piece. But without a little way, let's get to lighting this piece. To do this, I added a multiply layer over the character and erased it to add lights. I wanted two source lights for this piece, the first and main one being in the top right corner, this warm yellowish tint over the character. And after I blocked that out, I added a second source light, some blue flames coming from her hair using a glow layer. For a little TLDR of why I chose these things, well, they're just aspects of her character from the game called Zenless Zone Zero. This is not an ad, I just love this game. But when you attack with her, her hair gives off these blue icy flames, which I thought would give a good contrast to the rest of the warm and bright red colors in the painting. And now with these two lights roughly blocked in, let's skip to the final render so I could talk about how I added the other aspects of light into this. In terms of the original source light here, it's still the same, however I made it a lot stronger in both of them than they were in the beginning. The ambient light was very desaturated blue, as the background beyond the letters and the orbs are again also very desaturated and slightly blue. Where things get really interesting, however, is in the bounce light. These were very subtle in this drawing, but I believe they add that little bit of believability on top of the rendering. If we zoom in on the katana, that entire left side is covered in a mix of rim and bounce lighting from the red kanji behind it. And if we move down, we can see some of the pink being bounced off from the orb onto the sheath and the sleeve. If we move back up to the face, you can see some subtle red bits from the background, but again, these are really subtle because I didn't want it to stand out too much, as there was already a lot of information in this area. And finally, if we move on to that little bald dude over there, you can see a little bit of the blue flame reflected projected onto his underside. Beyond that, the rest of the drawing is just 9 hours of rendering at work, sticking with the lighting scheme and keeping things consistent. I hope that gave you guys a bit of insight on how I use lighting in some of my personal work, and I doubly hope that this video give you guys a deeper understanding of light in general. And with that, I'll catch y'all in the next one.